Mark Leibovich is chief national correspondent for the New York Times Magazine and a CBS News political contributor, and he joins us now from Washington. Mark, let's begin with this investigation the president previewed on Twitter this morning. What's the motivation here? Why spend time and, more importantly, the people's money investigating an investigation he won that everybody agrees he won?
I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, what's interesting is that, first of all, there are no secretaries of state pretty much anywhere in the country that think that voter fraud was any problem in the last election. These are Democrats, these are Republicans, these are nonpartisan jobs. So this has been looked into in several states. So there's nothing there. He seems to think that there is. He seems to think that there is some information that hasn't either been released or discovered. So he's going to pursue this. I mean, this is this is part of a long line of investigations, of announcements that Donald Trump has been sort of saying were imminent that never actually happened. I mean, whatever it is that his investigators discovered in Hawaii about President Obama's birth certificate, I think he promised that Melania Trump would do a press conference a few months ago. That never happened. I think a few weeks ago, when he was going back and forth with the CIA over intelligence, he said he had some privileged information that he was going to share. None of that ever happened, and I mean, who knows what's going to become of this investigation? But obviously, the bigger problem or the bigger issue here, in addition to whether there's merit to this fight, is whether it erodes a president's credibility. Whether when you say so much with so little evidence and then you don't actually produce any evidence that is compelling to people, what happens when you're actually trying to sell something or actually communicate something that's much more urgent and much more important?
It almost sounds like he's sort of mixing two different issues. It's hard to tell because we're getting all this information based on some tweets, but it seems like two different issues: voter fraud and maybe outdated voter rolls. He talks about the fact that a number of dead people were on the voter rolls. Dead people aren't voting, so they're not participating in fraud.
Right, correct. I mean, there is an apples to oranges thing. I mean, obviously, the American electoral system in the various states is not perfect. There are always going to be snags, and there's always room for improvement. So, I mean, I guess he could say that he's doing this in a way to optimize the process or make it better than it is. But that's very different from saying that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally, and thus I didn't win the popular vote, which seems to be what's driving this particular fight. So, I mean, it's unclear exactly what his intent is and what his objectives are.
Mark, do you see this as a gift for Democrats as they search for an issue, any issue that they can rally around? Or does this not matter to the millions of supporters of Donald Trump? Because lest we forget, he's no longer a real estate mogul, reality TV star. He's the president of the United States, and what he says on Twitter matters to people that support him. And regardless of the reporting that you or I do, or your organization or CBS News does, the people are going to say, look, the president of the United States says it, so it must be true.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the president of the United States has a very, very strong bully pulpit. And I mean, traditionally, presidents have used that, and press secretaries have used that very judiciously. And there's usually, there's been a lot more care and caution in the past about what kind of stuff is communicated. Often it has come out in the past as obfuscation, as dodging, as boilerplate. And Donald Trump, for better or worse, does not talk in that way. And I think that's what's refreshing to a lot of people about him, is what got him such a name in the campaign. Having said that, like you said, it is a different platform. It's a completely different job. And I do think that, it's hard to say, is this a gift to Democrats? I mean, I'm sort of out of the, is this a gift to Democrats prediction business at this point, because, we've misread the electorate so many times around Trump over the last several months. But I do think that the larger risk here is over the long term and what it does to a president's credibility. And again, despite all of the conversation and all of the executive action that's gone on in the last 4 days since he's been inaugurated, the fact is the presidency is a very reactive office, and there have not been any really big events for the president to react to since he took the oath of office a few days ago. There's a really good chance that the first 100 days, 200 days, 300 days of his administration is going to be defined by forces well beyond his control that we don't know about and that are forthcoming, and we'll see how he handles those.
You brought up the executive actions. Let's talk about what's supposed to be happening today. The president is expected to sign more executive actions surrounding immigration and funding the border wall. I'm curious, where do you see this fight going? Where will it end up when Congress gets a chance to weigh in on this?
Well, I mean, I think it will come down to funding. I mean, funding is sort of, I mean, there's always been a consensus, at least in the Republican Party and certainly among Donald Trump's supporters, that a wall was a good thing. I mean, build a wall was one of the go-to chants at his campaign rallies. It's what his supporters expect him to do, and it looks like he's following through on doing that. Now, the other part of that during the campaign is that Mexico will pay for it. There is, to this point, no indication that Mexico has any inclination or any desire or any intention of paying for it. And, we'll see when it gets to actually being appropriated, the money to actually build a wall, which is not a cheap undertaking. We'll see where the debate goes. I imagine a lot of Republicans in Congress, especially if President Trump's popularity ratings don't rise very much, are going to remember a lot of the hand-wringing that was done within the Republican Party a few years ago about spending, about regret over the kind of big government programs they sanctioned under George W. Bush. I mean, this was all a fairly fresh debate a few years ago, and I think it might be a bit of a reach to think that just because it's Donald Trump and just because he's a new and obviously very powerful personality, their principles are just going to sort of follow suit naturally. So I think funding is probably where that debate's going to get much more interesting and probably much more contentious, certainly on Capitol Hill.
And Mark, as the president works down these list of campaign promises, we're now seeing reports that the administration is preparing an executive order that would pave the way for the CIA to reopen overseas so-called black sites. Now, Senator John McCain has already come out and released a statement that reads in part, quote, "The president can sign whatever executive order he likes, but the law is the law. We are not bringing back torture in the United States of America." Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think John McCain, is in a position to be an extremely visible and powerful figure. I mean, he is someone who was reelected last year. He's obviously a well-known figure within the Republican Party, and he has shown in the past a willingness to buck his own party and to be very outspoken. Torture is an issue that's extremely important to him. It's something that, he had personal experience with in Vietnam. And, I mean, right now, there's a fairly small but fairly vocal group of Republicans in the Senate, McCain being one, Lindsey Graham being another, maybe Ben Sass of Nebraska being another, that are going to speak up on these things. And I think the legal piece of this is really what's going to resolve it. I mean, he's right. I mean, executive orders he can sign an executive order every day for the rest of his term if he wants. But again, I mean, there are going to be a lot of lawyers involved in this before it's over, and there already are, so we'll see where that leads.
All right, Mark Leibovich of the New York Times Magazine. We always appreciate your insight, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlad. Appreciate it.